Hey, how's it going? My name's Eric, and today I'm going to show you how we built this lumber rack on Spenceley Design Co. Let's check it out. The first thing you're going to need is just a couple random pieces of scrap 2x4, and then the other thing that we're going to need is some plywood scraps. The first cut that we need to make is cutting the 2x4 pieces down to 9.5 inches. And to cut this piece of 2x4 down, you can use any saw that you have. You could use a circular saw, you could use a jigsaw, and you could use a miter saw if we don't have one, or you could use a table saw. While a handheld saw like the circular saw here works great, the fastest way to batch out a lot of these is done by setting up a stop block. That way, we can get pieces that are identical lengths cut very quickly without the need to remeasure anything. The next step is to break down the plywood into some 6-inch strips. Now I'm going to use the table saw here since it's the fastest method for me. Now if you don't have a table saw, there's no problem. As long as you have a circular saw or really any other kind of saw, you can cut down strips. It's just not going to be as fast and as accurate. So if you don't have a table saw and you decide to use a circular saw or maybe a jigsaw, the first thing that you need to do is set your square to 6 inches and mark a line down the board. And then if you have a steady hand and you really take your time, you can surprisingly get a pretty straight cut. And while I finish off this cut, I just want to say that if you're new here and you like what you see, consider hitting that subscribe button down below. No pressure. With the 6-inch width all set, we now need to cut down all these pieces to 13 inches long. Again, you can use whatever saw that you want, but the table saw is the fastest for me. And while I cut these pieces down, I want to remind you to check out all of our cool rewards we have available on our Patreon page. That's the perfect way to show your support for the show, so see if it's right for you. Now this last cut that we need to make doesn't actually make any of the brackets stronger, but it makes everything look better. I set one of the pieces of 2x4 on the plywood and then marked a line where it intersected the edge. I then drew a line from the mark to the opposite corner and used the circular saw to cut to the line. Although the circular saw definitely works great here, the fastest way to make all these cuts is once again on the table saw. I have this plywood sled that attaches to my table saw, and all I need to do is line up the marks that I drew on the board to the edge of the sled. Then, a few pieces of scrap are screwed down to the plywood sled to hold the pieces in place, and I can run it through the blade. Once one cut is done, I simply lift off the piece, set down the next one, and, like a pro, power through the rest. Speaking of power and pro, Power Pro was kind enough to send me over these 2-inch construction screws. Now I've used these screws in the past many times, but I haven't specifically called it out, and I really wanted to show you the difference between a premium and a generic screw. A generic screw typically has a Phillips head that, tend to strip really easily. These premium screws have a T20 star drive head, and this Power Pro container comes with a free bit just in case you don't have one. A generic screw needs to have the head countersink before it's driven into the material, but the premium screws have blades on the bottom that save you that step. Not to mention that they also don't require pre-drilling. If you've ever made a sandwich before, the construction should be pretty simple to you. We're basically making a sandwich with the 2x4s acting like the pastrami and then the plywood acting like the bread. Well, probably more like flatbread though, or this sandwich just has double meat. Cured meat talk aside, once all the brackets were made, it's time to attach them to the wall way above the garage door. You coming? To attach them to the wall, I just slid it over the 2x4 stud, clamped it in place, and then drove in some more 2-inch construction screws on each side, and the rack was finished. Now you're probably thinking that having the lumber rack up above the garage door is really inconvenient, but actually it works out great. All the wood is going to be stored neatly out of the way, and it's not like you hit the lumber rack up every 10 minutes.